The desert sun left no shadows to hide in when Theresa Landon buried her father. The small wooden cross she'd hammered together herself stood stark against the horizon of Copper Ridge, Arizona Territory, 1879. Not a single person from town had come to pay respects, not that she'd told anyone. The mining camp turned struggling settlement had already forgotten James Landon, just another prospector who'd chased dreams into an early grave. Theresa's fingers trembled as she arranged the wildflowers she'd gathered that morning. Her father's final resting place deserved beauty, even if only for a day before the merciless sun withered it away. Just like everything else in her life. "Pa," she whispered, her voice catching. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." The wind offered no answers as it swept across the scrubland. Theresa brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand, not wanting even the empty land to witness her grief. She'd always been the strong one, even as a child. When her mother died of fever when Theresa was 12, she'd stepped into the role of running their small household without complaint. Now, at 22, she was truly alone. The small cabin they'd called home sat on the edge of a played-out claim, worth next to nothing. The mining company had already sent a representative to inform her that her father's debts exceeded any value in the property. She had 1 month to vacate. "I'll figure something out," she promised the cross, squaring her shoulders. "Don't you worry about me." She didn't realize someone was watching until a horse nickered in the distance. Startled, Theresa turned to see a rider sitting motionless on a chestnut gelding about 50 yards away. Embarrassment flooded her cheeks. She hated the thought of anyone witnessing her vulnerability. The stranger tipped his hat in silent acknowledgement, but made no move to approach. Theresa hastily gathered her things, ducking her head to hide her reddened eyes as she started the long walk back to the cabin. Behind her, Wyatt Ryder watched the young woman's retreating form, noting the rigid set of her shoulders and the determined pace despite the obvious weight of her grief. He'd arrived in Copper Ridge just yesterday, seeking work at the Silverado mine, when he'd overheard talk in the saloon about Old Man Landon finally drinking himself to death after years of failing to strike it rich. No one had mentioned a daughter. Wyatt turned his horse toward town, troubled by the solitary funeral and the woman left behind. He'd seen too much loneliness in his 30 years, most of it his own, to ignore someone clearly in need. But Copper Ridge wasn't known for its hospitality to strangers, especially ones asking questions. The mining town consisted of a dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon that doubled as a brothel, a small bank, the mining company office, and a handful of other establishments clinging to life as the silver veins in the nearby mountains grew thinner. Men with hard faces and harder lives moved purposefully through the afternoon heat, paying little attention to Wyatt as he tied his horse outside the general store. The shopkeeper, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, eyed Wyatt suspiciously as he entered. "Afternoon," Wyatt said, removing his hat. "I was hoping to buy some supplies." The man nodded curtly. "Cash only. Credits for locals." Fair enough. Wyatt began selecting items: coffee, beans, jerky, ammunition for his Winchester, while casually asking, "Heard about James Landon passing. Sad business." The shopkeeper's face remained impassive. "Nothing sad about a drunk finally meeting his maker." "That's just the natural order." Wyatt kept his expression neutral. "I saw a young woman at a gravesite outside of town." "That his daughter?" "Theresa." The man's tone softened slightly. "Good girl, unlike her pa. Always pays her bills on time, even when it means going without. Shame she's stuck with his debts." "She's staying in town." The shopkeeper's suspicious gaze returned. "Why you asking about Theresa Landon? She's got enough troubles without some drifter sniffing around." Wyatt raised his hand slightly. "Just being neighborly. Seemed like she could use some help is all." She's too proud to take charity. Besides, she'll likely be heading to Tucson soon. Her aunt lives there, I hear." The man began tallying Wyatt's purchases. "That'll be $3.42. Wyatt paid and gathered his supplies. "Much obliged." "Word of advice," the shopkeeper called as Wyatt reached the door. "Folks here mind their business. Newcomers should do the same." Wyatt nodded but made no promises as he stepped back into the harsh sunlight. The warning only strengthened his resolve to check on the young woman. He'd recognized something in the set of her shoulders and the tilt of her chin, a determination to face the world alone because she believed she had no other choice. He knew that feeling all too well. Theresa returned to the small cabin she'd shared with her father, methodically removing her black shawl and hanging it by the door. The home was modest but clean, its interior a testament to her efforts to create order amid her father's chaotic life. Now she moved through it like a ghost, touching familiar objects and wondering what would become of them of her. The mining company representative, Mr. Holcomb, had made it clear. Either she paid her father's outstanding debts of $200 or everything would be seized. The cabin, the land, even her mother's cherished china teacup, the only item of value Theresa possessed. She sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a small tin box containing their meager savings. $15.73. Not nearly enough. Her aunt in Tucson had written after receiving news of James's death, offering Theresa a place to stay. The letter sat unopened on the table. Going to Tucson meant admitting defeat, abandoning the home her father had built with his own hands during one of his rare periods of sobriety. It meant leaving behind her mother's grave alongside the creek where wildflowers bloomed in spring. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Visitors were rare, especially after her father's reputation in town had soured. Theresa quickly wiped her eyes and smoothed her dress before opening the door. The man from the hillside stood on her porch, hat in hand. Up close, she could see he was tall, with broad shoulders and eyes the color of a summer storm. His face was weathered, but not unkind, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble. "Miss Landon?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. Theresa's spine stiffened. "Yes, can I help you?" "Name's Wyatt Ryder. He hesitated. "I noticed you up on the hill earlier. I wanted to offer my condolences about your father." Her face flushed. "You saw me at the grave?" "Yes, madam. I didn't mean to intrude." "What are you doing here, Mr. Ryder?" Her tone was sharper than she'd intended, but she felt exposed, vulnerable. "I was wondering if you needed any help. Around the place, I mean." He gestured vaguely at the cabin. "I'm handy with tools, and it looks like that roof could use some patching before the summer storms hit." Theresa's pride flared. "I can't pay you." "Wasn't asking for payment." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "Just offering a neighbor's hand." "We're not neighbors. I don't even know you." A small smile touched his lips. "Fair point. I'm new in town, looking for work at the mine. I've been riding from place to place since the war ended. Served with the Union cavalry in Tennessee and Georgia." Theresa studied him. His clothes were worn but clean, his manner respectful. Still, experience had taught her to be wary of men offering unsolicited help. "That's kind of you, Mr. Ryder, but I'm managing just fine." "All due respect, Miss Landon, but that roof won't hold through a good rain. I noticed it riding up." He pointed to the northwest corner where several shingles had blown off during the winter. "Wouldn't take more than an afternoon to fix." Theresa hesitated. The roof did need repair, and she had neither the skills nor the materials to fix it herself. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Wyatt's expression softened. "Because someone once helped me when I was at my lowest. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person willing to lend a hand when you think you're invisible." Something in his words resonated within her. For years, she'd felt unseen, the daughter of a failure, keeping up appearances while her world crumbled around her. "I have some wood and tools in the shed," she said finally, "but I can only offer you a meal in exchange." Wyatt smiled, and for the first time, Theresa noticed the small crinkles around his eyes. "That's more than fair. I'll come back tomorrow morning if that suits you." "Tomorrow, then." As she closed the door behind him, Theresa wondered if she'd made a mistake trusting this stranger. But the roof did need fixing, and in a month, it wouldn't be her problem anymore. What harm could come from accepting a single day's help? Wyatt returned to town with thoughts of Theresa Landon weighing on his mind. Her proud demeanor couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes, a look he recognized from his own reflection in the difficult years after the war. Back then, he drifted from town to town, haunted by the things he'd seen and done, until an old rancher named Cooper had given him work and purpose when he'd been on the edge of self-destruction. Now, years later, he had the chance to pass on that kindness, but he sensed Theresa Landon wouldn't accept charity easily. The Silverado Saloon was crowded when Wyatt pushed through its swinging doors that evening. Miners fresh from their shifts drank and gambled away their earnings, while piano music competed with raucous laughter and occasional arguments. Wyatt found a quiet corner and ordered a whiskey, listening to the conversations around him. "Heard they're shutting down the East Tunnel," one miner said to another. "Not enough ore to justify the expense." "Damn shame. My cousin just arrived from St. Louis looking for work." "He's out of luck. They're cutting men, not hiring." Wyatt frowned into his glass. If the mine was reducing operations, his prospects for employment were dim. He'd have to look elsewhere, perhaps one of the ranches outside town. A commotion near the bar drew his attention. A well-dressed man with a gold watch chain across his vest was berating the barkeeper. "I told you to have my usual table ready. Do you know who I am?" "Yes, Mr. Holcomb. Sorry, Mr. Holcomb." The barkeeper hurried to clear a table in the corner. Wyatt recognized the name from his conversation with Theresa. Holcomb, the mining company representative who'd delivered the news about her father's debts. He watched as the man strutted to his table, ordering those already seated there to move. A young miner accidentally bumped Holcomb's elbow as he passed, causing the man to spill his drink. "You clumsy fool!" Holcomb shouted, shoving the miner hard. "Look what you've done!" "Sorry, sir," the young man stammered. "I didn't mean—" Holcomb's hand moved to his pistol. "You think you can disrespect me? I run this town." Wyatt was on his feet before he realized it, stepping between them. "Seems like an honest mistake to me," he said calmly. "No harm done." Holcomb's cold eyes assessed Wyatt. "Who the hell are you?" "Nobody important, just thinking there's no need for guns over a spilled drink." The saloon had gone quiet, all eyes on the confrontation. Holcomb's hand remained on his pistol, but he didn't draw. "You're new," he said finally. "So I'll give you one piece of advice. Don't cross me. This town belongs to the Silverado Mining Company, and I represent their interests." Wyatt held his gaze. "Noted." After a tense moment, Holcomb removed his hand from his gun. "Get this man a drink," he called to the bartender. "On my tab. Consider it a welcome to Copper Ridge." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And a warning." Wyatt nodded but didn't sit back down. Instead, he finished his whiskey in one swallow and headed for the door, feeling Holcomb's gaze boring into his back. Outside, he took a deep breath of the cool evening air. He'd just made an enemy, and in a town this small, that could be dangerous. But something about Holcomb's demeanor troubled him. The man seemed too invested in his power, too eager to demonstrate it. Wyatt had seen men like him before, the kind who enjoyed crushing others beneath their boot heels simply because they could. Theresa Landon was up against this man and his company. The odds weren't in her favor. Dawn broke over the desert landscape as Theresa prepared for Wyatt's arrival. She'd been up since before first light, sweeping the cabin and yard, determined not to appear destitute despite their circumstances. Pride was all she had left. She'd just finished making coffee when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Wyatt rode up leading a second horse with lumber and tools strapped to its back. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Morning, Miss Landon," he called, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not too early." "Not at all, Mr. Ryder." She gestured to the pot on the stove. "Coffee's ready if you'd like some before you start." Much obliged. He secured his horses to the hitching post and followed her inside. The cabin was simple but homey, with a small kitchen area, a wooden table with chairs, and a sitting area with a worn sofa. 2 doors led off to what Wyatt assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean and well-maintained, though he noticed patches on the furniture and curtains that had been mended multiple times. "Nice place," he said, accepting the mug she offered. "It's not much, but it's home." A shadow crossed her face. For now, at least. Wyatt took a sip of coffee. "Strong, just how I like it." My father always said coffee should stand up on its own or it wasn't worth drinking. Her voice softened at the memory. Wise man. Theresa's gaze sharpened. No, he wasn't. My father was many things, but wise wasn't one of them. He was a dreamer who chased silver and found nothing but dirt. She turned away, busying herself at the stove. I apologize. That was uncharitable. No need to apologize for honesty, Miss Landon. She faced him again, her brown eyes direct. Why are you really here, Mr. Ryder? What do you want from me? The question hung between them, loaded with the wariness of a woman who'd learned not to trust easily. Wyatt set down his mug. Nothing you're not willing to give, Miss Landon. I saw someone who could use help and I offered it. Simple as that. Nothing is ever that simple. Sometimes it is. He met her skeptical gaze steadily. I've been where you are alone, with the world pressing down. Back then I thought no one saw me either. Theresa's expression flickered with surprise before she masked it. And who saw you, Mr. Ryder? An old rancher in Wyoming found me drunk and fighting in a saloon, about to get myself killed. Instead of leaving me to my fate, he dragged me back to his ranch and put me to work. Saved my life, though I didn't appreciate it at the time. And now you're paying it forward? Her tone was less accusatory, more curious. Something like that. Wyatt finished his coffee. Though I doubt you need saving the way I did. You strike me as capable of handling your own troubles. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I've had plenty of practice. The moment of connection hung between them, fragile as morning mist. Then Theresa straightened, reverting to her practical self. The tools are in the shed. I'll show you what needs fixing. The morning passed in steady work. Wyatt stripped the damaged sections of roof and replaced them with fresh shingles, while Theresa worked in her garden, occasionally glancing up at his progress. By midday, the summer heat was oppressive, and Wyatt had removed his shirt, his tanned skin glistening with sweat as he hammered the last shingles into place. Theresa tried not to notice the way his muscles moved beneath his skin, or how his dark hair curled against his neck. It had been a long time since a man other than her father had been around the cabin, and never one who looked like Wyatt Ryder. Water? She called up, offering a dipper from the well. Wyatt climbed down the ladder and accepted it gratefully. Thank you kindly. As he drank, Theresa saw a long scar running across his ribs. War wound? She asked before she could stop herself. Wyatt glanced down. Saber cut at Chickamauga, got separated from my unit and ran into a Confederate cavalry patrol. Lucky to have survived. My father was too old to fight, but my uncle died at Gettysburg. She took back the dipper. The war took so much from so many. That it did. Wyatt's eyes held shadows of memories he clearly preferred not to revisit. Roof's almost done. Should be finished by mid-afternoon. I've made stew for lunch. Nothing fancy, but it's filling. Sounds perfect. They ate at the small kitchen table, the stew rich with vegetables from Theresa's garden. Wyatt ate with appreciation, complimenting her cooking. Where did you learn to cook like this? He asked. My mother taught me before she passed. She was determined I'd know how to run a proper household. Theresa smiled at the memory. She'd be dismayed to see how little use I've made of those lessons, living out here on a failed mine claim. I think she'd be proud of how well you've managed, Wyatt said quietly. Theresa looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. You never knew her. No, but I know her daughter is strong enough to bury her father alone and face an uncertain future with her head held high. That speaks well of the woman who raised you. Theresa felt tears threatening and blinked them away. Thank you, she said simply, not trusting herself to say more. After lunch, Wyatt returned to work while Theresa washed the dishes, her mind troubled by emotions she couldn't quite name. Wyatt Ryder confused her. He seemed genuinely kind, yet experience had taught her that kindness often came with expectations. Men in Copper Ridge had been offering to help her for years, help that always came with conditions she wasn't willing to meet. Yet Wyatt asked for nothing but a meal. He worked diligently, spoke respectfully, and kept a proper distance. Perhaps he truly was just paying forward a kindness once shown to him. Or perhaps he had ulterior motives she hadn't yet discovered. By late afternoon, Wyatt had finished the roof, and moved on to fixing the sagging front porch steps. Theresa watched him work from the window, admiring his efficiency. Whatever his reasons, she couldn't deny he was skilled with his hands. A cloud of dust on the road caught her attention. A horse and rider were approaching Holcomb from the mining company. Theresa's stomach clenched with anxiety. "Mr. Ryder," she called, stepping onto the porch. "Someone's coming." Wyatt straightened, following her gaze to the approaching rider. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Holcomb reined in his horse, taking in the scene with obvious displeasure. "Miss Landon," he said, tipping his hat without dismounting. "I see you've found help." He glanced dismissively at Wyatt. "Though I'm not sure why you're investing in repairs when you'll be leaving soon." "The roof needed fixing regardless, Mr. Holcomb," Theresa replied coolly. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Just a courtesy call to remind you that your deadline is approaching. The company requires payment or vacant possession in 3 weeks." "I'm aware of the terms." Holcomb's gaze moved to Wyatt. "Ryder, isn't it? From the saloon last night." "That's right. Found employment quickly, I see." His tone implied something unsavory. Wyatt's expression remained neutral. "Just lending a hand to a neighbor." "How charitable." Holcomb turned back to Theresa. "Miss Landon, a word of advice: be careful about the company you keep. Some men might take advantage of a woman in your situation." Theresa felt her cheeks flush with anger. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Holcomb, but I'm perfectly capable of judging character for myself." "Of course," Holcomb smiled thinly. "Well, I won't interrupt your repairs. Good day, Miss Landon." He tipped his hat again. "Ryder?" They watched in silence as he rode away. Once he was out of earshot, Wyatt turned to Theresa. "Pleasant fellow," he remarked dryly. "He represents the mining company's interests," Theresa replied, her voice tight. "And their interest is getting me off this land as quickly as possible." "Why's that?" "The mine's played out, isn't it?" Theresa sighed. "The silver vein my father was following ran dry years ago, but there's a spring on our property, the only reliable water source for miles, that isn't controlled by the mining company. They've wanted it for years." Understanding dawned on Wyatt's face. "And now they can take it by calling in your father's debts." "Exactly. $200 by the end of the month, or everything is forfeit." Wyatt whistled softly. "That's a steep sum." "Impossible, more like." Theresa's voice remained steady, but Wyatt could see the despair she was fighting to conceal. "My aunt has offered me a place in Tucson. I should accept, but this is your home," Wyatt finished for her. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "What if you had the money?" Wyatt asked carefully. "Would you stay?" Hope flared briefly in her eyes before reality extinguished it. "It doesn't matter. I have less than $16 to my name." Wyatt was silent for a moment, considering. "There might be a way." "I won't accept charity, Mr. Ryder." "Not charity." "A business proposition." He gestured toward the spring. "How much water does that produce?" "Enough to supply a small ranch year-round, even in drought. That's why the mining company wants it. They're planning to expand operations if they can secure a reliable water source." "And what if we beat them to it?" "We?" Theresa raised an eyebrow. "I've been looking for work, but the mine's cutting back, not hiring. What if I helped you turn this place into something that could generate income? With water, we could run cattle, not many, but enough to start. The Silverado would still want your water, but they'd have to negotiate a fair price instead of stealing it." Theresa stared at him. "You're suggesting we become business partners?" "Why not? You have land and water. I have experience with cattle and some savings, not $200, but enough to get started if we can convince the bank to give us a short-term loan." "The bank works with the mining company. They won't lend to me." "They might lend to us," Wyatt countered, "especially if we present a solid plan. And if that fails, there are other options." Theresa's mind raced. What Wyatt proposed was audacious, perhaps even foolhardy. Yet it offered a glimmer of hope where before there had been none. "Why would you do this? You barely know me." "I know enough." His gray eyes held hers. "I know you're the kind of person who keeps fighting when most would surrender." "I respect that." "And your reward? Partners split profits, but that could take years." I've been drifting too long, Wyatt admitted. Looking for a place worth stopping. Maybe this is it. The proposition hung between them, laden with possibility and risk. Theresa had learned early that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, and yet, "I need time to think," she said finally. Wyatt nodded. "Of course. I'll finish the steps and be on my way. You know where to find me if you decide it's worth discussing further." As he returned to his work, Theresa retreated inside, her thoughts in turmoil. Wyatt's offer seemed sincere, yet experience had taught her that nothing came without a price. Was she willing to gamble what little security she had left on a partnership with a man she'd known for less than a day? The alternative, however, was certain defeat. That evening, after Wyatt had departed with a promise to return the following day, Theresa sat on her newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in brilliant oranges and purples. Her father had loved this view. It was why he'd built the cabin facing west, despite conventional wisdom that suggested orienting it to catch the morning sun instead. "The day's ending is just as important as its beginning," he'd told her once during a rare moment of sobriety. "It reminds us that even the most difficult days eventually come to a close." Theresa wondered what he would advise her now. Despite his failings, James Landon had been a dreamer, someone who believed that fortune could change with a single strike of a pickaxe. Would he tell her to take a chance on Wyatt's proposition, or would he warn her against trusting a stranger? She was still contemplating this when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Standing, she shaded her eyes against the setting sun, expecting to see Wyatt returning. Instead, she recognized the town's young doctor, Thomas Evans, riding toward the cabin. "Evening, Theresa," he called as he dismounted. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Dr. Evans." She managed a small smile. "What brings you out this way?" "Thomas, please." He removed his hat, revealing sandy hair and boyish features that made him appear younger than his 30 years. "I was sorry to hear about your father. I would have attended the service, but—" "There wasn't one," Theresa said quietly. "Just me and a wooden cross." Regret crossed his face. "I'm sorry. I should have come anyway." Theresa had known Thomas since he'd arrived in Copper Ridge 2 years earlier, fresh from medical school in Boston. He'd treated her father several times after particularly bad drinking spells, and had always been kind to Theresa, refusing payment when he knew they couldn't afford it. "Can I offer you some coffee?" she asked. "It's a long ride back to town." "That would be most welcome." He followed her inside, glancing appreciatively at the newly repaired roof. "You've been busy with repairs." "Not me. A friend helped." Thomas raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. After accepting a cup of coffee, he said, "Actually, I came to bring you this." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope. "It's not much, but it might help." Theresa took it hesitantly. Inside was $15. "I can't accept this," she said, trying to return it. Thomas gently pushed her hand back. "Your father's final bill. He paid in advance for treatment he never received. It's rightfully yours. But please, Theresa, if not for yourself, then for him. James would want you to have it." Tears pricked her eyes. With this money added to her savings, she had nearly $31, still far short of what she needed, but more than she'd had this morning. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas smiled, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "I also came to offer you a position, if you're interested. Mrs. Henderson is leaving town next month, and I need someone to help manage my office. The pay isn't much, but it includes a room above the surgery." Theresa stared at him, surprised. "You're offering me a job? You're intelligent, responsible, and good with people. I've seen how you handled your father's affairs all these years." He took a sip of coffee. "I know the mining company is pressing you to leave. This would give you an alternative to moving to Tucson." The offer was tempting a respectable position in town, away from the painful memories of the cabin, yet it meant surrendering her home, the spring, everything her parents had worked for. "I'm considering other options as well," she said carefully, "but I appreciate your kindness more than I can express." Thomas studied her over the rim of his cup. "These other options. They wouldn't happen to involve the stranger who was working on your roof today. Theresa blushed despite herself. You saw him? Rode past earlier. Tall fellow, looked capable. His tone was neutral, but Theresa detected concern beneath it. New in town, isn't he? Yes, Wyatt Ryder. He's offered to help me keep the property. I see. Thomas set down his cup. Theresa, I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but be careful. Copper Ridge attracts all sorts. Some are good people looking for a fresh start, but others. I appreciate your concern, Thomas, but Mr. Ryder has been nothing but respectful. Of course, he stood, placing his hat back on his head. The offer of employment stands regardless. You have friends in town, Theresa. Remember that. After Thomas left, Theresa returned to the porch, her thoughts more tangled than before. Two paths now lay before her: security in town under Thomas's protection, or a risky venture with Wyatt that might allow her to keep her home. Both men had shown her kindness when she needed it most. Both offered a future where yesterday she'd seen none. But which path to choose? The answer came to her as the last light faded from the sky, revealing the first stars of evening. Her father had been a dreamer, but her mother had been practical, resilient. It was her mother's strength that had sustained Theresa all these years. What would Elizabeth Landon advise her daughter? To accept a secure position that meant surrendering her heritage, or to risk everything on a chance to preserve it? Theresa knew the answer before she fully formed the question. Her mother would tell her to fight for what mattered, but to do so wisely, with her eyes open to both possibility and peril. Tomorrow, she would give Wyatt Ryder her answer. Tonight, she would pray it was the right one. Wyatt sat in the small room he'd rented above the livery stable, counting the money in his possessions. $78.23, his entire worldly wealth after years of drifting from job to job across the Western Territories. Not enough to clear Theresa's debt, but perhaps enough to start something new. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd offered to help her. Something about her quiet dignity in the face of loss had stirred memories of his own struggles after the war. For years he'd wandered without purpose, haunted by the things he'd seen and done in battle. Only the intervention of an old rancher named Cooper had saved him from a path of self-destruction. A man needs 3 things, Cooper had told him: purpose, a place to call home, and people who matter more than himself. Find those, and you'll find peace. Wyatt had found purpose in honest work, but the other 2 elements had eluded him. Whenever he started to put down roots, the restlessness would return, driving him onward to the next town, the next job, the next temporary respite. But something about Copper Ridge, about Theresa Landon, made him want to stay. Perhaps it was the challenge of outwitting Holcomb and the mining company. Perhaps it was simply time for his wandering to end. Or perhaps it was the way Theresa's eyes lit up when she spoke of her home, revealing the passion beneath her carefully maintained composure. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find the young miner he'd defended in the saloon. "Evening," the young man said nervously. "Name's Billy Carter. I wanted to thank you for stepping in with Holcomb yesterday." "No need for thanks, he was out of line." Still, most folks wouldn't risk crossing him. Billy glanced over his shoulder, then lowered his voice. "Listen, I heard you're helping the Landon girl. Thought you should know something about Holcomb and that land." Wyatt ushered him inside and closed the door. "I'm listening." "I worked the south tunnel at the Silverado. Last month we broke through into a new chamber, found the richest silver vein anyone's seen in these parts for years. And this relates to the Landon property how? The vein runs right under their claim. Holcomb knows it, but the company can't access it without controlling the surface rights." Understanding dawned on Wyatt. "So the water isn't the only reason they want her out. The water's valuable, sure, but it's what's beneath it they're really after." Billy shook his head. "They're planning to drive her out by any means necessary. If she doesn't leave willingly, there might be accidents." "You're saying they'd hurt her?" Wyatt's voice hardened. "I'm saying mining companies don't let small obstacles stop them from getting what they want. Never have." Billy moved toward the door. "Just thought you should know what you're up against. Be careful, mister. Holcomb has men who'll do whatever he asks." After Billy left, Wyatt paced the small room, his mind working through this new information. If what the young miner said was true, Theresa's situation was more precarious than he'd realized. The mining company wouldn't stop at legal means to acquire her property, not with a fortune in silver at stake. He needed to warn her, but he also needed a plan. If they were going to challenge the Silverado Mining Company, they would need allies, resources, and time. And time was the one thing they didn't have. The next morning, Wyatt rode out to Theresa's cabin earlier than he'd planned, concern hastening his journey. He found her already in the yard, feeding chickens that scratched in the dust. "Mr. Ryder," she called, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "I didn't expect you so early." "Miss Landon." He dismounted, leading his horse to the hitching post. "I need to speak with you on an urgent matter." Her expression grew serious. "Has something happened?" Wyatt glanced around, suddenly aware that open spaces could have unwelcome ears. "Perhaps we could talk inside." Once in the cabin, Wyatt related everything Billy had told him about the silver vein and the company's determination to acquire her property. Theresa listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each word. "So it isn't just the water," she said when he finished. "There's silver under my land. Apparently a lot of it." Theresa sat heavily in a kitchen chair. "That explains why Holcomb has been so persistent. I thought he was just following company orders about the spring." "This changes things," Wyatt said, pacing the small kitchen. "If they believe there's a fortune at stake, they won't give up easily." "What do we do?" The question was simple, but it carried weight, a recognition that whatever happened next, they would face it together. Wyatt paused, struck by her use of we instead of I. "First, we need to establish your legal claim to the mineral rights. Do you have your father's deed?" Theresa nodded, moving to a small secretary desk in the corner. She withdrew a leather folder and removed several yellowed documents. "My father purchased this land outright in '68, after he returned from his first moderately successful prospecting venture." She handed Wyatt the deed. The seller was the original territorial land office before the mining company bought up most of the surrounding claims. Wyatt examined the document carefully. "This deed includes mineral rights, all resources above and below ground." He looked up at Theresa. "Do you realize what this means? That legally, any silver beneath my property belongs to me?" "Exactly. The Silverado can't mine it without your permission, even if they could access it from their adjacent tunnels. That's why they're so desperate to force you out." Hope flashed briefly in Theresa's eyes before doubt clouded them. "But what good does that do us? I can't mine the silver myself, and in 3 weeks I'll lose everything anyway when they call in my father's debts." "Not necessarily." Wyatt laid the deed on the table between them. "This changes our bargaining position. The mining company wants what you have, both the water and the silver. That gives you leverage." "Leverage for what? They've made their terms clear. Pay the debt or leave." "Those were their terms when they thought you were powerless." A smile slowly spread across Wyatt's face. "But what if they discovered you know about the silver? And what if they learned you were in talks with their competition?" Understanding dawned on Theresa's face. "You want to bluff them?" "Not entirely. The Carson Mining Company has been trying to establish operations in this region for years. They'd be very interested to learn about a rich silver vein right under the nose of their biggest competitor." "And you think the Silverado would rather deal with me than risk Carson moving in?" "I think they'd pay a lot more than $200 to prevent that from happening." Theresa considered this, her practical mind assessing the risks and potential rewards. "It's dangerous. If Holcomb discovers we're bluffing, then we need to make sure our bluff is convincing." Wyatt leaned forward. "Have you decided about my proposal, about us working together?" Her eyes met his, searching. "I have. And before I answer, I need to know something." She took a deep breath. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Ryder? The truth, please." Wyatt held her gaze. "The simple answer is that I see someone worth helping. But if you want the whole truth—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "I see someone who reminds me that there's still goodness in this world, even when it seems darkest. Someone who faces each day with courage, who carries her burdens without complaint." He smiled slightly. Someone who looked at me and saw a person worth trusting, when most would see just another drifter. The cabin was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Theresa's expression softened, vulnerability showing through her careful composure. "Yes," she said finally, "I accept your proposal. We'll be partners." Relief and something warmer flooded through Wyatt. "Then we'd better get to work. We have a mining company to outwit and a ranch to build." "A ranch?" Theresa raised an eyebrow. "I thought we were focusing on the silver rights. The silver gives us leverage, but ranching gives us a future." Wyatt spread his hands on the table. "Think about it. With the spring, this land is perfect for raising cattle. Once we've dealt with the Silverado, we can use whatever settlement they offer to build something lasting." "You're planning to stay then, even after the immediate crisis is resolved?" The question hung between them, laden with implications beyond their business arrangement. Wyatt met her eyes steadily. "I'd like to, if you'll have me." A flush spread across Theresa's cheeks. "We should focus on saving the property first. The future can wait until we know we have one." But something had shifted between them, a recognition of possibilities that extended beyond their current circumstances. Wyatt felt it in the way she looked at him, in the slight tremor of her hand as she gathered the documents from the table. "So what's our first move?" she asked, her practical nature reasserting itself. "First, we visit the bank. Then we send a telegram to the Carson Mining Company." Wyatt grinned. "And then we wait for Holcomb to discover he's not the only player in this game." The Copper Ridge Bank occupied a small but imposing stone building on the town's main street. Its interior was cool and quiet, with a polished counter separating customers from the tellers. Theodore Barnes, the bank manager, was a thin man with spectacles and a perpetual frown that deepened when he saw Theresa and Wyatt enter. "Miss Landon," he said, his tone professionally cordial but cool. "What can the bank do for you today?" "Mr. Barnes," Theresa nodded politely. "I'd like to discuss a loan to clear my father's debts with the Silverado Mining Company." Barnes's frown became more pronounced. "I see. Perhaps we should speak in my office." Once they were seated in the small room behind the teller's counter, Barnes steepled his fingers and regarded them over his spectacles. "Miss Landon, while I sympathize with your situation, I must be frank. The bank cannot extend credit without adequate collateral or a reliable source of income. Your father's history with finances makes such an arrangement impossible." "I understand," Theresa replied calmly. "However, circumstances have changed. I'm now in business with Mr. Ryder, developing a cattle operation on my property." Barnes's gaze shifted to Wyatt, assessing. "Is that so? And what experience do you have in the cattle business, Mr. Ryder?" 5 years as foreman on the Cooper Ranch in Wyoming," Wyatt replied truthfully. "Before that, I worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas." "I see." Barnes's tone remained skeptical. "And you believe a small cattle operation can generate sufficient revenue to repay a substantial loan?" "The property has year-round water," Wyatt pointed out. "That's rare in these parts and valuable for raising livestock." "Yes, the spring." Barnes removed his spectacles and polished them methodically. "A desirable feature, certainly. However, I must consider the bank's interests. The Silverado Mining Company has expressed their intention to acquire that property. They are valued customers of this institution." "I'm aware of their interest," Theresa said, meeting Barnes's gaze directly. "Just as I'm aware of why that interest has intensified recently." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the banker's face. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The silver vein that runs beneath my property," Theresa clarified, her voice steady. "The one the Silverado discovered last month when they broke through into a new chamber from their south tunnel." Barnes's composure slipped momentarily before he recovered. "I'm not privy to the mining company's operations, Miss Landon." "Of course not," she agreed smoothly. "Just as you're not aware that I've been in communication with representatives from the Carson Mining Company regarding my mineral rights." This time, Barnes couldn't hide his surprise. "Carson? They have no presence in this territory." "Not yet," Wyatt interjected, "but they're very interested in establishing one, especially when informed about untapped silver deposits with clear title." Barnes removed his spectacles again, his movements less steady than before. I see. This puts things in a different light. We're not asking for charity, Mr. Barnes, Theresa said. Just a fair consideration of our loan application based on the true value of the property. And if the bank cannot assist us, Wyatt added, we understand. The Carson representative suggested their company might be willing to advance funds against future mineral rights. It was a bluff, but Barnes had no way of knowing that. After a long moment, he replaced his spectacles and reached for a form in his desk drawer. Perhaps we can discuss terms, he said, his tone markedly warmer. The bank is always interested in supporting local enterprise. An hour later, they emerged from the bank with a provisional loan agreement. Barnes had offered $200, exactly the amount needed to clear Theresa's debt with the property as collateral and a 6-month timeline for repayment. I can't believe that worked, Theresa murmured as they walked toward the telegraph office. Barnes didn't get to be bank manager by backing losers, Wyatt replied. Once he realized the Silverado might have competition, he hedged his bets. Now we need to make sure Holcomb gets the same message. At the telegraph office, Wyatt composed a message to the Carson Mining Company, carefully worded to suggest ongoing discussions while revealing nothing specific about their situation. It was another calculated risk. Carson might ignore the telegram entirely, but if they responded with even mild interest, it would strengthen their position against the Silverado. As they stepped back onto the street, Theresa suddenly gripped Wyatt's arm. Holcomb was approaching from the direction of the mining company office, accompanied by 2 men Wyatt recognized as the same tough-looking characters who'd been with him at the saloon. Well, well, Holcomb said, stopping directly in their path. Miss Landon and her hired help. Conducting business in town? Mr. Holcomb. Theresa's voice was cool but polite. Yes. We're making arrangements to settle my father's account with your company. Surprise flickered across Holcomb's face. Is that so? I was under the impression you lacked the necessary funds. Situations change, Wyatt said, keeping his tone neutral despite the tension running through him. Holcomb's companions had positioned themselves to either side, creating a subtle but unmistakable blockade. Indeed they do, Holcomb agreed, his gaze hardening. However, there may be additional considerations beyond the original debt. Property assessments, interest calculations. These things can complicate settlements. Are you saying the amount has changed? Theresa asked, a tremor of anger in her voice. I'm saying business arrangements require flexibility, Miss Landon. Holcomb smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, in my office. Any discussion regarding Miss Landon's property can include me, Wyatt said firmly, as her business partner. Partner? Holcomb's eyebrows rose. How enterprising of you, Miss Landon, though I wonder if you're aware of Mr. Ryder's reputation in other mining towns. What are you implying, Mr. Holcomb? Theresa's voice was steady, but Wyatt felt her tense beside him. Only that your new friend has a history of inserting himself into valuable claims, Holcomb replied smoothly. In Nevada, I believe it was a widow much like yourself. The poor woman lost everything after trusting him. He looked directly at Wyatt. Isn't that right, Ryder? Wyatt kept his expression neutral, though anger coursed through him. You're misinformed, Holcomb, but I'm not surprised you'd resort to lies when intimidation fails. Holcomb's face hardened. You're making a mistake, both of you. The Silverado doesn't appreciate interference in its business affairs. Neither do I, Theresa replied, her voice stronger than Wyatt had ever heard it. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have matters to attend to. You'll receive payment for my father's legitimate debts no more, no less within the week. She stepped forward, forcing Holcomb and his men to move aside or physically block her. After a tense moment, they stepped back, allowing her and Wyatt to pass. This isn't over, Holcomb called after them. Not by a long shot. Wyatt placed a protective hand at the small of Theresa's back as they continued down the street, aware of the eyes following them. Once they were out of earshot, he murmured, You were magnificent. A small smile touched her lips despite the worry in her eyes. Was I? I was terrified. It didn't show. He guided her toward the livery where his horse was stabled. But Holcomb's right about one thing: this isn't over, and now it's personal for him. Do you think he was telling the truth? About you and the widow in Nevada? Wyatt stopped, turning to face her. No, there was no widow. There was a mining claim I worked for fair wages, nothing more. He hesitated, then added, but I haven't always lived the kind of life I'm proud of. Theresa, after the war, I was lost, angry. I drank too much, fought too often, moved on before connections became attachments. And now? Her eyes searched his, looking for reassurance she needed but was too proud to ask for directly. Now I'm trying to be the kind of man who deserves a second chance. He held her gaze steadily. The kind of man who keeps his promises. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a dawning trust that made Wyatt's heart beat faster. But before she could respond, a commotion erupted further down the street. Shouts and the sound of running feet drew their attention. "Fire!" someone yelled. "Fire at the doctor's office!" Theresa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Thomas!" They rushed toward the crowd gathering outside the doctor's small clinic, where smoke was already billowing from the windows. Men were forming a bucket brigade from the town well, but the fire had taken hold quickly in the wooden structure. "Is the doctor inside?" Wyatt asked a bystander. "No one knows," the man replied. "He might be making rounds." Without hesitation, Wyatt pushed through the crowd toward the burning building. Theresa called after him, but he was already wrapping his bandana around his face and plunging through the door. Inside, the smoke was thick and disorienting. Flames licked up the walls of the waiting room, consuming the wooden furnishings with frightening speed. Wyatt dropped to his knees where the air was marginally clearer. "Dr. Evans!" he shouted. "Anyone here?" A weak cough answered him from the back room. Wyatt crawled toward the sound, finding Thomas Evans sprawled on the floor, a bloody gash across his forehead. "Help me up," the doctor gasped. "My patient's records." "No time," Wyatt said, hoisting the smaller man over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. "Building's about to go." He staggered toward the door, lungs burning from the smoke. A section of ceiling collapsed behind them as they reached the exit, showering them with burning debris. Wyatt felt a searing pain across his back, but kept moving, bursting through the door into the fresh air outside. Willing hands took the doctor from him, and someone doused his smoldering shirt with water. Through watering eyes, Wyatt saw Theresa rushing toward him, her face pale with fear. "Thomas, is he all right?" she asked, kneeling beside the doctor who was being tended by several townspeople. "Bumped his head," Wyatt coughed, his throat raw. "Should be fine." Thomas was already sitting up, looking dazed but alert. "It wasn't an accident," he said, his voice raspy. "Someone broke in. I surprised them, and they struck me." He looked at the burning building, despair in his eyes. "Everything I've worked for." "Who was it?" Wyatt asked, though he already suspected the answer. "I didn't see clearly. 2 men. One was large, with a beard." Thomas touched the gash on his head gingerly. They were searching for something. Wyatt exchanged a glance with Theresa. One of Holcomb's men had sported a thick beard. "Dr. Evans," Theresa said quietly. "Did they ask about me or my property?" Thomas's hesitation was answer enough. "They wanted to know what you'd told me about your plans. When I said I didn't know anything, they became insistent." His expression hardened. "Then they set the fire to cover their tracks." The bucket brigade was fighting a losing battle against the flames. The clinic would be a total loss. As they watched, Sheriff Miller, a weathered man with a gray mustache, approached their small group. "Dr. Evans, you all right?" he asked gruffly. "I'll survive, Sheriff." Miller nodded, then turned to Wyatt. "Brave thing you did, mister. Foolish, but brave." His sharp eyes took in Wyatt's appearance. "You're the newcomer, right? Working for Miss Landon?" "With Miss Landon," Wyatt corrected. "We're business partners." The sheriff's gaze moved between them, assessing. "Doc says this wasn't an accident. You know anything about that?" "Only that it happened right after we had a confrontation with Holcomb," Wyatt replied, meeting the sheriff's gaze directly. "Interesting timing." Miller's expression remained impassive. Holcomb works for the biggest employer in the county. Making accusations without proof is a good way to find yourself in trouble. It's not an accusation, Sheriff, Theresa interjected. Just an observation about timing. Miller studied her for a moment, then sighed. Look, Miss Landon, I'm sorry about your father and your situation. But my advice is to take whatever offer the mining company's making and start fresh somewhere else. This isn't a fight you can win. With respect, Sheriff, that's for us to decide, Wyatt said. Miller shook his head. Suit yourselves. But don't expect the law to take sides against the Silverado. That's not how things work here. He touched the brim of his hat. Doc, my office is open if you need to file a formal report. As the sheriff walked away, Thomas struggled to his feet with Theresa's help. He's right about one thing, the doctor said quietly. The mining company owns this town, including most of the law enforcement. Where will you go? Theresa asked, concern evident in her voice. Mrs. Henderson has a spare room. I'll start rebuilding once the ashes cool. Thomas looked at his ruined clinic with resignation, then turned to Theresa. But you should reconsider the sheriff's advice. These men won't stop at burning a building. We can't let them win through intimidation, Theresa replied, a new determination in her voice. This is my home, Thomas. I won't be frightened away from it. The doctor's gaze moved between her and Wyatt, understanding dawning in his eyes. I see your mind is made up. Just be careful. He squeezed her hand briefly. Both of you. As Thomas walked away to speak with other townspeople, Wyatt examined Theresa closely. Are you all right? She was staring at the burning clinic, her expression a mixture of anger and resolve. No, she said simply. I'm not. They hurt Thomas to get to me. This changes things, Wyatt agreed. Holcomb's escalating faster than I expected. What do we do now? For the first time since he'd met her, Theresa looked truly shaken. Wyatt touched her arm gently. Now we stop playing defense. It's time Holcomb learned what happens when he threatens the wrong people. They rode back to Theresa's cabin in tense silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The encounter with Holcomb and the fire at the doctor's office had made it clear. The mining company wouldn't be satisfied with legal maneuvers. They were willing to use violence to get what they wanted. As they approached the cabin, Wyatt suddenly reined in his horse, signaling for Theresa to do the same. What's wrong? She asked, keeping her voice low. Wyatt pointed toward the cabin. Smoke. Coming from behind the house? Fear flashed across Theresa's face. The shed. My father's tools are stored there. They approached cautiously, circling wide to come up on the property from the rear. The small wooden shed was indeed burning, flames already consuming half the structure. Beyond it, the chicken coop had been broken open, the birds scattered or taken. They've been here, Wyatt said grimly. Probably hoped to burn the cabin too, but something must have spooked them. Theresa dismounted and rushed toward the well, grabbing the bucket. We need to stop it before it spreads. For the next hour, they fought the fire together, hauling water from the well and dousing the flames. By the time they had the blaze under control, the shed was destroyed, but thankfully the fire hadn't spread to the cabin or other structures. Exhausted and soot-covered, Theresa sank onto a stump in the yard. They're trying to destroy everything, she said, her voice hollow. But they didn't. Wyatt knelt beside her. The cabin's safe, the spring is intact, and most importantly, you're unharmed. She looked up at him, her brown eyes reflecting the dying embers of the shed. For how long? What's to stop them from coming back tonight? Or tomorrow? I am. Wyatt's voice was quiet but firm. I'm staying here until this is resolved, one way or another. You can't watch the property every minute. No, but I can make it clear that attacking this place has consequences. He stood, a plan forming in his mind. The Silverado is vulnerable too. Their operation depends on their reputation, their equipment, their access to capital. Theresa frowned. What are you suggesting? Not violence, Wyatt assured her, reading her concern. Information. The mining company has secrets they don't want exposed, like the extent of the silver vein under your property, or their willingness to use intimidation against a woman living alone. Who would care? The sheriff made it clear the law won't help us. Not the local law, perhaps. Wyatt smiled grimly. But there's a newspaper in Tucson that's been investigating mining company practices throughout the territory. A telegram to their editor might generate interest, especially with a story involving a young woman being terrorized by powerful interests. Hope flickered in Theresa's eyes. Public exposure. Exactly. The Silverado answers to investors in San Francisco and New York. Those men care about profits, yes, but also about public perception. A scandal could affect their stock prices. Theresa considered this, her practical nature assessing the strategy. It might work, but it would take time. Meanwhile, we're still vulnerable. I have a more immediate plan for that. Wyatt offered her his hand, helping her to her feet. But first, let's check the cabin and make sure nothing was disturbed inside. To their relief, the interior of the cabin was untouched. While Theresa washed away the soot and grime from fighting the fire, Wyatt examined the property's perimeter, looking for signs of the intruders. He found footprints from at least 3 men and tracks from their horses heading back toward town. When he returned to the cabin, Theresa had changed into a clean dress and was preparing a simple meal. Despite the day's turmoil, the domestic scene stirred something in Wyatt's chest, a longing for the kind of peace he'd been chasing since the war ended. "I'll need to ride to the Carson mining camp tomorrow," he said as they sat down to eat. "It's about 20 miles north of here." Theresa looked up in surprise. "You're actually going to approach them? I thought that was just a bluff for Barnes and Holcomb." "It started as a bluff, but now we need real leverage." Wyatt tore a piece of bread from the loaf between them. "Carson and Silverado have been rivals for years. If Carson gets wind of a major silver deposit that the Silverado is trying to acquire through questionable means, they might be very interested in providing protection in exchange for future considerations." "You think they'd help us against the Silverado?" "I think they'd help themselves to a chance to undermine their competitor. Our interests would align temporarily." He met her gaze across the table. "But I won't go if you're uncomfortable with the idea. It means leaving you alone for at least a day." Theresa considered this, her expression thoughtful. "No, you should go. We need allies, and the Carson Company is our best hope." She smiled slightly. "I can protect myself for 1 day. My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. I don't doubt your abilities, but Holcomb's men have already shown they're willing to use force." "I'll be vigilant," she promised. "And perhaps I should visit Thomas in town, make sure he's recovering. If I'm seen in public, Holcomb's men are less likely to try anything immediately." Wyatt nodded, though concern still gnawed at him. "That makes sense. But take your father's rifle and keep it close." Their meal finished, they moved to the small sitting area where a single lamp cast warm light against the gathering dusk. The day's events had shifted something between them, an awareness that they were truly in this struggle together, their fates intertwined. "You should take my room tonight," Theresa said suddenly. "I'll sleep out here on the sofa." "I won't displace you from your bed," Wyatt objected. "The sofa is fine for me." "You were injured in the fire," she pointed out, gesturing to the burn on his back that she'd insisted on treating with salve. "And you have a long ride tomorrow. You need proper rest." Wyatt recognized the practicality of her argument, though the idea of sleeping in Theresa's bed surrounded by her scent, her presence stirred emotions he was trying to keep in check. "If you're sure," he conceded finally. Theresa nodded, then hesitated. "Wyatt." It was the first time she'd used his given name. "Thank you for everything you've done." "I haven't done much yet," he replied, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how the lamplight caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "You've given me hope," she said softly. "That's no small thing." For a moment, they sat in silence. The air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Theresa stood, breaking the spell. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day for both of us." Wyatt nodded, watching as she gathered bedding for the sofa. The protective instinct he felt toward her had evolved into something deeper, something that both exhilarated and terrified him. After years of avoiding attachments, he found himself caring deeply about what happened to Theresa Landon, not just her property or her situation, but her happiness, her future, a future he increasingly hoped might include him. Dawn was just breaking when Wyatt saddled his horse the next morning. Theresa stood on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the early chill, watching as he made final preparations for the journey. "Remember, stay in public places as much as possible," he reminded her, "and if anything feels wrong, anything at all, go to Thomas or Billy Carter from the mine. They're the only ones I trust in town." "I'll be careful," she promised, handing him a small package. "Some food for the ride." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Wyatt fought the urge to pull her into his arms, to postpone his journey and stay by her side. But time was working against them. The loan from Barnes would clear Theresa's immediate debt, but without additional resources and protection, Holcomb would simply find another way to force her off the land. "I'll be back by tomorrow evening," he said, mounting his horse. "If everything goes well, I'll bring news that will change the game in our favor." Theresa nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Be safe." Wyatt tipped his hat, then turned his horse northward, casting one last glance over his shoulder as he rode away. Theresa remained on the porch, her slender figure silhouetted against the cabin. The image stayed with him as he rode through the morning hours, fueling his determination to succeed in his mission. The Carson mining camp was larger than he'd expected, a sprawling operation with a stamp mill, offices, and workers' housing clustered around the entrance to several mine shafts. Unlike the Silverado, which had grown alongside the town of Copper Ridge, the Carson operation was entirely self-contained, a small industrial city in the wilderness. Wyatt approached the main office, where a clerk regarded him suspiciously. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," Wyatt said, removing his hat. "I have information about a silver deposit that might interest your company." The clerk's expression remained skeptical. "Mr. Carson doesn't see people without appointments. Tell him it concerns the Silverado's new discovery near Copper Ridge, and that they're using questionable methods to secure the property rights." This caught the clerk's attention. After a moment's hesitation, he disappeared into an inner office. When he returned, his demeanor had changed completely. "Mr. Carson will see you now." Edward Carson was a thick-set man with shrewd eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that was more salt than pepper. He studied Wyatt carefully as he entered the well-appointed office. "So, you have information about the Silverado," Carson said without preamble. "Why bring it to me instead of selling it to them?" "Because they are already aware of it," Wyatt replied. "They're just not being honest about their intentions or methods." He explained the situation with Theresa's property, the silver vein that ran beneath it, and Holcomb's escalating tactics of intimidation. Carson listened without interruption, his expression giving away nothing. "Interesting," he said when Wyatt finished. "But what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Ryder? That Carson Mining should intervene in a private dispute? Or are you offering to sell this young woman's property to us instead?" "Neither," Wyatt said firmly. "Miss Landon has no intention of selling her land. What we're proposing is a partnership. The property has a reliable water source that would benefit any mining operation in the area. Miss Landon would consider leasing water rights to Carson Mining in exchange for protection of her property interests and a fair share of any proceeds from minerals extracted from beneath her land." Carson's eyebrows rose. "Bold proposal. What makes you think I wouldn't simply wait for the Silverado to drive her off, then negotiate with them for access? Because by then, the Tucson Sentinel will have published a detailed account of how the great Silverado Mining Company uses thugs to terrorize young women and burn out doctors who try to help them." Wyatt smiled thinly. "Bad publicity affects stock prices, Mr. Carson, and it makes territorial authorities take a closer look at operations they might otherwise ignore." A reluctant smile tugged at Carson's lips. "You're not just some cowhand, are you, Ryder?" "I've learned a few things about negotiation over the years." Carson leaned back in his chair, studying Wyatt with new interest. "Let's assume I'm intrigued by your proposal. What assurance do I have that this silver vein is as rich as you claim?" "The Silverado's own actions provide that assurance," Wyatt countered. "They wouldn't resort to intimidation and arson if the prize wasn't substantial." Fair point. Carson drummed his fingers on the desk. Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll send 2 of my men back with you, experienced miners who can verify the potential of this deposit from the surface signs. If their assessment is positive, we can discuss terms for the kind of partnership you're suggesting. It was more than Wyatt had hoped for. That's acceptable. One more thing, Carson added. These men will also serve as, let's call it, a visible deterrent to further aggression from the Silverado's representatives. They'll remain on the property until our business is concluded, one way or another. Wyatt nodded, understanding the dual purpose. The miners would both assess the value of the silver and provide protection for Theresa. When can they be ready to leave? First light tomorrow. Carson stood, extending his hand. I must say, Mr. Ryder, you've made what could have been an ordinary Tuesday considerably more interesting. Wyatt shook the offered hand. Glad to be of service. As he left the office, Wyatt felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The meeting had gone better than he dared hope. With Carson Mining's interest confirmed and protection on the way, Holcomb and the Silverado would have to reconsider their tactics. Now, he just needed to get back to Theresa and ensure she was safe until help arrived. Theresa spent the morning after Wyatt's departure putting her house in order. With everything that had happened, small tasks had been neglected. She swept the floors, washed the windows, and hung laundry in the yard to dry in the desert sun. Ordinary activities that helped calm her mind despite the extraordinary circumstances. By midday, she was ready to ride into town as planned. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that had been her mother's, and pinned her hair neatly. Appearances mattered in Copper Ridge. She refused to give the gossips anything more to talk about than they already had. Her father's rifle, cleaned and loaded, was secured to her saddle. The weight of it was both reassuring and troubling. She had never imagined needing it for protection against other people, only the occasional wolf or coyote that threatened the chickens. The town seemed unnaturally quiet as she rode down the main street. A few people nodded in greeting, but many averted their eyes. News of the confrontation with Holcomb and the fire at Thomas's office had clearly spread. She tied her horse outside Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, where Thomas had taken temporary lodging. The elderly widow answered her knock with a sympathetic smile. He's in the back parlor, dear. Still a bit shaken, but recovering well. Thomas was seated in an armchair near the window, a bandage around his head. His face brightened when he saw Theresa. You shouldn't have risked coming to town, he said, though his eyes conveyed his pleasure at seeing her. I needed to make sure you were all right. She took the chair opposite him. And to apologize. What happened to you to your practice, it's because of me. Thomas shook his head, then winced at the movement. No, it's because of men who value profit above human decency. None of this is your fault, Theresa. Still, I feel responsible. She leaned forward. Is there anything I can do? Anything you need? Just knowing you're safe is enough. His gaze sharpened. You're safe, aren't you? Where's Ryder? Wyatt rode to the Carson mining camp this morning. He's trying to arrange protection for the property. Thomas looked surprised. Carson? They're Silverado's biggest competitor. Exactly. Wyatt thinks they might be willing to help us in exchange for consideration regarding the silver and water rights. She hesitated, then added, he should return tomorrow. And you're alone at the cabin until then? Concern etched Thomas's features. I can take care of myself, Theresa assured him, though her confidence wavered as she said it. Besides, Holcomb's men won't try anything so soon after the fire. Too suspicious. Thomas didn't look convinced. Stay here tonight. Mrs. Henderson has plenty of room. I can't leave the property unattended if they came back while I was gone. At least stay in town until dusk, Thomas urged. Have dinner at the hotel. The longer you're in public view, the less opportunity they have to cause trouble at your place. Theresa saw the wisdom in his suggestion. All right, I have a few errands to run anyway. They talked a while longer, Thomas sharing his plans to rebuild his practice once he recovered. Despite his losses, his determination to continue serving the community remained unshaken. His resilience inspired Theresa, reinforcing her own resolve to fight for her home. After leaving Mrs. Henderson's, Theresa visited the general store to purchase supplies. The shopkeeper, Mr. Peterson, was more talkative than usual, inquiring about her well-being and expressing shock at the recent events. "Terrible business with the doctor's office," he said, shaking his head as he measured coffee into a paper bag. "And I heard about the trouble at your place, too. Shed burned, wasn't it?" Theresa nodded, surprised that news had traveled so quickly. "Sheriff do anything about it?" Peterson asked. "He took note of the damage," she replied diplomatically, unwilling to criticize the law openly. "But there wasn't much evidence to go on." Peterson snorted. "Never is when it comes to the mining company's doings." He lowered his voice. "Listen, Miss Landon, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your mother was a fine woman, and your father, well, he had his troubles, but he wasn't a bad sort. What's happening to you isn't right." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard, then continued in a hushed tone. "Word around town is that Holcomb's mighty upset about your partnership with that Ryder fellow. Been drinking at the saloon, making threats." Alarm flickered through Theresa. "What kind of threats?" "Nothing specific. Just boasting that he'd take care of the problem, once and for all." Peterson's kind eyes reflected genuine concern. "You be careful, Miss Landon, and tell that partner of yours to watch his back." The warning weighed heavily on Theresa as she completed her errands. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising one of the sudden summer storms common to the region. She decided to head back to the cabin rather than stay in town until dusk, as Thomas had suggested. The idea of riding home in a downpour was less appealing than facing potential danger. As she rode, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and distant lightning. She urged her horse to a faster pace, hoping to reach home before the storm broke. The landscape looked different in the strange golden light that precedes a storm, familiar shapes transformed into something almost otherworldly. Perhaps that's why she didn't immediately notice the riders following her until they were less than a quarter-mile behind. Heart pounding, Theresa glanced back to confirm her suspicion. 3 men on horseback, moving at a steady pace that would intercept her before she reached the cabin. Even at this distance, she recognized the bulky silhouette of Holcomb's bearded henchman. Abandoning caution, Theresa dug her heels into her horse's flanks, urging the animal to a gallop. Behind her, she heard shouts as her pursuers also increased their pace. The race was on, with her property line serving as the finish. The cabin came into view just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Theresa flew into the yard, dismounting before her horse had fully stopped and rushing toward the porch where her rifle was secured to the saddle. Her fingers fumbled with the leather straps as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Finally, freeing the weapon, she turned to face her pursuers, rifle raised. The 3 men reined in their horses at the edge of the yard, clearly surprised by her armed stance. "That's far enough," she called, her voice carrying over the increasing rainfall. "This is private property." The bearded man laughed. "Not for long, missy. Mr. Holcomb sent us to deliver a message." "I'm not interested in any message from Holcomb." Theresa kept the rifle steady, though her hands wanted to tremble. "Leave now while you still can." "Or what? You'll shoot all 3 of us?" The man dismounted slowly, unconcerned by the weapon aimed at his chest. "I don't think you've got the stomach for killing, Miss Landon. Putting down an injured horse is one thing. Putting a bullet in a man is another." The casual reference to something only someone who had been watching her property would know sent a chill through Theresa. How long had they been observing her, planning their move? The bearded man took a step forward. "Now be reasonable. Put down the gun, and we'll talk like civilized folks." "There's nothing to talk about." Theresa stood her ground, water dripping from the brim of her hat as the rain intensified. "Mr. Holcomb knows my terms. $200 clears my father's debt. The property isn't for sale at any price." "See, that's where you're wrong." Another step forward. "Everything has a price. Mr. Holcomb authorized us to make you a final offer, $300 for the whole claim. That's generous considering the circumstances." "The circumstances being that you burned down Dr. Evans's office in my shed?" Theresa's anger overcame her fear. That you're threatening a woman living alone? Tell Mr. Holcomb he can take his offer and—" The sound of a rifle being cocked interrupted her. One of the mounted men had his own weapon out now, aimed in her direction. "Careful, Miss Landon," the bearded man warned, his tone hardening. "We came to talk business, but we're prepared to handle things differently if necessary. Accidents happen all the time in these parts. Lightning strikes, houses burn." His gaze traveled deliberately to the cabin behind her. People disappear. Terror and rage warred within Theresa. She was outnumbered and outgunned. If she fired, she might hit one of them, but the others would surely kill her. If she surrendered, there was no guarantee they wouldn't harm her anyway. A deafening crack of thunder shook the ground, momentarily distracting everyone. In that instant, a new sound joined the storm's fury, hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the east. All eyes turned toward the source. A rider emerged from the curtain of rain, pushing his horse hard. Even at a distance, Theresa recognized Wyatt's broad-shouldered silhouette. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by fresh fear. 1 against 3 were still terrible odds. But as Wyatt drew closer, she realized he wasn't alone. 2 more riders appeared behind him, all 3 approaching with the deliberate pace of men who knew exactly what they were riding into. The bearded man cursed, backing toward his horse. His companions already had their mounts turning, uncertain in the face of unexpected opposition. "This isn't over," the bearded man called to Theresa. "Tell your boyfriend he's made a serious mistake." Then they were galloping away, disappearing into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. Theresa remained frozen in place, rifle still raised, as Wyatt and his companions thundered into the yard. He dismounted in one fluid motion, crossing to her in long strides. "Theresa, are you hurt?" His hands grasped her shoulders, eyes scanning for injuries. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook. They were just leaving when you arrived." Relief washed over Wyatt's features. For a moment, it seemed he might pull her into an embrace. Instead, he gently lowered the rifle she was still clutching. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe now." Only then did Theresa become aware of the other men, who had dismounted and were standing respectfully at a distance. Both wore the rugged clothing of miners, with Carson Mining Company badges pinned to their coats. "Miss Landon," Wyatt said, turning toward them, "these men are from the Carson operation. Mr. Carson sent them to help protect the property and assess the silver deposit." The older of the 2 miners stepped forward, removing his hat despite the rain. "Sam Donovan, madam. This is my colleague Jim Ferris. Mr. Carson sends his regards and assurances of his company's interest in your situation." Theresa found her composure. "Thank you for coming. Please, let's get out of this downpour." Inside the cabin, as they dried off and warmed themselves by the stove, Wyatt explained the arrangement he'd made with Carson. The miners would stay for at least a week, conducting surveys and providing security. Meanwhile, Carson himself would be applying pressure on the Silverado through business channels, making it clear that any further aggression toward Theresa would result in formal complaints to territorial authorities and Eastern investors. "It's not a permanent solution," Wyatt concluded, "but it buys us time to strengthen our position." "And if the survey confirms valuable silver deposits?" Theresa asked, glancing at the miners who were enjoying the coffee she'd prepared. "Then Carson is prepared to offer a formal partnership," Wyatt replied. 20% of all mineral proceeds to you as the property owner, plus fair compensation for water rights." Donovan nodded confirmation. "Mr. Carson values ethical business relationships, madam. Not all mining operations are run like the Silverado." "This could really work," Theresa said, allowing hope to take root. "We could actually win against Holcomb and his company." "We've already started winning," Wyatt said with a smile. "The moment you stood your ground with that rifle, facing down 3 armed men, that was victory, Theresa. Everything else is just details." The admiration in his eyes warmed her more than the stove's heat. For the first time since her father's death, Theresa felt the weight of uncertainty lifting. The path ahead remained challenging, but she was no longer walking it alone. Over the next several days, the property bustled with activity. Donovan and Ferris conducted their survey. taking samples from various locations and examining the geological formations that indicated the silver vein's direction. Meanwhile, Wyatt began repairs to the damaged structures and strengthened the cabin's defenses, installing better locks and reinforcing the shutters. Theresa watched these developments with growing optimism. The miners' presence had deterred further visits from Holcomb's men, and preliminary reports from the survey were promising. The silver vein appeared to be substantial, running diagonally across her property at a depth that would require significant mining infrastructure to access. "This is why they've been so aggressive," Donovan explained one evening as they reviewed his findings. "Based on the orientation and quality of the samples, I'd estimate this vein contains silver worth millions. The Silverado probably broke into it from their existing tunnels and realized it extends primarily under your land. So without my property rights, they can't legally extract most of the silver," Theresa said, understanding fully at last. "Exactly. And if word got out about the discovery, claimed jumpers and corporate competitors would descend like locusts." Donovan smiled grimly. "Holcomb's in a tight spot. He needs to acquire your land quietly and quickly, before anyone else realizes what they've found." "Too late for that now," Wyatt observed. "With Carson Mining involved, the secret's out. Holcomb will have to change tactics." "Which makes him more dangerous, not less," Ferris added. "Desperate men take desperate measures." Theresa considered this soberly. "Then we need to resolve this situation sooner rather than later." "Carson sent word that he's meeting with Silverado executives in Tucson next week," Donovan said. "He'll make it clear that any further action against you will result in public exposure and legal challenges that could tie up the silver rights for years." "And if they agree to back off," Theresa asked, "then we negotiate terms for a three-way agreement," Wyatt explained. "You maintain ownership of the surface property and water rights. Carson and Silverado form a joint venture to extract the silver, with you receiving a percentage of the proceeds." It sounded almost too good to be true, a resolution that would allow her to keep her home while providing financial security she'd never imagined possible. Yet, Theresa couldn't shake a sense of unease. Holcomb had demonstrated he wasn't a man to accept defeat gracefully. Her concerns proved justified 3 days later, when Billy Carter rode out to the cabin in a state of agitation. "Miss Landon, Mr. Ryder," he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "You need to hear this." Inside, Billy explained that he'd overheard a conversation between Holcomb and several company men while working in the mine. "They're planning something tonight," he said, his young face grave. "Holcomb's furious about Carson Mining getting involved, says he needs to eliminate the problem before the executives arrive from San Francisco." "What exactly did you hear?" Wyatt asked, his expression hardening. "They were talking about using dynamite, making it look like an accident, like Miss Landon stored mining explosives improperly." Billy's hands trembled slightly. "I couldn't stay to hear more. They would have killed me if they caught me listening." "You've taken a huge risk coming here," Theresa said, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Thank you, Billy." Wyatt was already moving toward the door. "Donovan, get your gear. We need to set up a perimeter. Ferris, help me move anything valuable into the root cellar just in case." He turned to Theresa. "You should go to town. Stay with Dr. Evans until this is over." "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "This is my home, and I'll defend it." Wyatt recognized the determination in her eyes, the same resolve that had first drawn him to her. "All right. But you stay inside, away from windows." "I can shoot," she reminded him. "You might need every gun we have." He couldn't argue with her logic. With only 4 of them against an unknown number of attackers, they needed all available hands. As dusk fell, they positioned themselves strategically around the property. Wyatt and Donovan took the front approaches, while Ferris covered the rear near the spring. Billy, armed with a spare shotgun, was stationed with Theresa inside the cabin, tasked with protecting her if the others failed. The night grew dark, clouds obscuring the moon and stars. Only the soft sounds of desert creatures broke the silence as they waited, tension mounting with each passing hour. "Maybe they changed their plans," Billy whispered as midnight approached. "Maybe they realized it was too risky." "Or maybe they're waiting for us to let down our guard," Theresa replied, keeping her voice low. Wyatt said Holcomb's type prefers to attack when they think you're vulnerable. As if summoned by her words, a faint sound reached them, the distant clink of metal against stone. Someone was approaching from the direction of the old mine shaft on the property's edge. Theresa moved to the window, peering carefully through a crack in the shutters. In the darkness, she could just make out moving shadows, men creeping toward the cabin from multiple directions. "They're coming," she whispered to Billy. "At least 5 of them." Billy's face paled in the dim lamplight. "What do we do?" "We stick to the plan. Wyatt and the others will intercept them before they reach the cabin." She checked her rifle again. "We're the last line of defense." Outside, Wyatt had also spotted the approaching figures. He signaled to Donovan, who nodded understanding. They would wait until the intruders were fully committed before revealing their presence. The shadows moved with purpose, several carrying what appeared to be satchels, likely containing the dynamite Billy had mentioned. Wyatt recognized Holcomb's bulky frame among them, hanging back while his men did the dangerous work. When the intruders were within 20 yards of the cabin, Wyatt stood from his concealed position. "That's far enough, Holcomb," he called, his rifle trained on the group. "Drop your weapons and those satchels." Shouts of surprise erupted from the men as they realized they'd been anticipated. Several dropped to the ground, reaching for their guns. "You're trespassing on private property with explosives," Donovan added from his position. "That's a hanging offense in this territory." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Holcomb's voice cut through the darkness. Kill them all, and burn everything." Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes illuminating the night. Wyatt dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around him. He returned fire methodically, aiming for the flashes rather than the barely visible figures. Inside the cabin, Theresa flinched at the first shots. "Get down," she ordered Billy, dropping to the floor herself. Seconds later, bullets thudded into the cabin walls, one shattering a window despite the shutters. "They're going to kill us all," Billy moaned, his youthful bravado evaporating in the face of real danger. "No, they won't," Theresa replied with a calmness she didn't entirely feel. "Wyatt won't let that happen." Outside, the gunfight intensified. One of Holcomb's men had worked his way around to the side of the cabin, trying to place explosives against the foundation. Ferris spotted him and fired, winging the man who dropped the satchel and fled back toward his companions. Holcomb, seeing his plan unraveling, shouted new orders. 2 men broke away, rushing toward the spring with clear intent to destroy the property's most valuable feature. Wyatt saw the maneuver and called to Donovan. "They're heading for the spring! Stop them!" Both men redirected their fire, but in the darkness, accuracy was difficult. One of the attackers fell, but the other reached the spring, fumbling with a dynamite charge and matches. Inside the cabin, Theresa also saw the threat through the window. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle, steadied it against the windowsill, and fired through the broken pane. The shot rang out, distinct from the other gunfire. The man by the spring crumpled, the unlit dynamite falling harmlessly beside him. Holcomb, witnessing his plan falling apart and his men being picked off, finally lost his nerve. "Retreat!" he bellowed. "Back to the horses!" The remaining attackers began withdrawing, firing wildly to cover their escape. Wyatt and Donovan pressed their advantage, moving forward to ensure they didn't regroup. For several minutes, sporadic gunfire continued as Holcomb and his surviving men fled into the darkness. Then silence fell, broken only by the moans of the wounded. "Clear!" Donovan called after a thorough check of the perimeter. "Clear here too," Ferris confirmed from the rear of the property. Wyatt approached the cabin cautiously. "Theresa? Billy? Are you all right?" The door opened, and Theresa stood framed in the lamplight, rifle still in hand. "We're unharmed. Is it over?" "They're gone," Wyatt assured her, relief evident in his voice, though they left some injured behind. In the aftermath, they found 2 of Holcomb's men wounded, one by the spring that Theresa had shot, another near the front of the property. Neither injury was life-threatening, though both men would require medical attention. "What about Holcomb?" Theresa asked, as they secured the prisoners. "Escaped with the others," Wyatt replied grimly. "But he won't get far. By morning, the sheriff will have to acknowledge what happened here, regardless of the mining company's influence." And if he doesn't? Theresa's voice reflected her doubt about local law enforcement. Then Carson's men will escort these two to Tucson, where territorial marshals take a dimmer view of attempted murder and property destruction. Wyatt placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Either way, it's over, Theresa. Holcomb's actions tonight have ensured that the Silverado can no longer support him. No company can afford to be associated with this kind of violence once it's exposed. As dawn broke, they sent Billy to town to fetch the sheriff and Dr. Evans for the wounded men. Theresa moved through the cabin, assessing the damage from the gunfire, broken windows, splintered wood, bullet holes in walls. Yet the structure stood firm, and more importantly, everyone who had defended it had survived unscathed. "We did it," she said quietly to Wyatt, who was checking the dynamite satchels to ensure they posed no further danger. "We actually won." Wyatt straightened, his expression softening as he looked at her. Despite the night's events, she appeared stronger than ever, her eyes clear and resolute. "Yes," he agreed, "though I suspect the real victory is just beginning." Sheriff Miller arrived mid-morning, accompanied by Dr. Evans and, surprisingly, a representative from the Silverado Mining Company, not Holcomb, but an older man introduced as Mr. Whitfield, the company's regional director. "Miss Landon," Whitfield said, removing his hat as he approached, "on behalf of the Silverado Mining Company, I want to express our deepest apologies for the actions of Mr. Holcomb and his associates. I assure you, they acted without company authorization or knowledge." The statement was clearly rehearsed, designed to distance the company from legal liability. Yet, Theresa noted the concern in Whitfield's eyes was genuine. "Mr. Holcomb made it very clear he was acting on company interests," she replied evenly. "Former company interests," Whitfield corrected. "Mr. Holcomb's employment was terminated this morning when we learned of last night's events. The Silverado does not condone violence or intimidation, regardless of the business opportunity involved." Sheriff Miller, looking uncomfortable with the situation, added, "We've got men searching for Holcomb and the others who fled. They won't get far." "And the charges against them?" Wyatt pressed. "Attempted murder, destruction of property, illegal use of mining explosives," the sheriff recited. "Enough to send them to territorial prison for many years, Mr. Ryder." While Dr. Evans tended to the wounded men, Whitfield requested a private conversation with Theresa and Wyatt. Donovan and Ferris joined them, representing Carson Mining's interests. "The situation has clearly escalated beyond a simple property dispute," Whitfield began once they were seated around Theresa's kitchen table. "The Silverado recognizes that our approach was misguided." "That's one way to put it," Wyatt remarked dryly. Whitfield inclined his head in acknowledgement. "We understand that Carson Mining has expressed interest in a partnership regarding the silver deposits beneath this property. The Silverado would like to propose an alternative arrangement." "We're listening," Theresa said, though her tone suggested limited patience for corporate maneuvering after the night's events. "Full forgiveness of your father's debts, plus $10,000 for surface rights to access the silver vein." Whitfield named a sum that made Theresa's breath catch. "You would retain ownership of the cabin, the spring, and 20 acres surrounding both. The mining operations would remain underground with minimal disturbance to your property." "And Carson Mining?" Donovan asked, raising an eyebrow. Whitfield smiled thinly. "We're prepared to discuss a joint extraction agreement, similar to arrangements we have in other territories. Mr. Carson and our executives can negotiate those details directly." Theresa exchanged glances with Wyatt, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. "Your offer is generous, Mr. Whitfield, but insufficient." Surprise flashed across the executive's face. "Miss Landon, $10,000 is a substantial sum for surface access rights, especially considering the property's remote location and limited agricultural potential." "The property's value isn't limited to agriculture," she countered. "As you're well aware, the spring provides the only reliable water source in the area not controlled by your company. Its worth extends beyond silver mining." "What are you proposing?" $20,000, forgiveness of all debts, and I retain ownership of the entire surface property." Theresa's voice was steady, betraying none of the amazement she felt at her own audacity. The Silverado receives underground mineral rights only, with specified access points that don't interfere with my ranch operations. Ranch operations? Whitfield repeated, bemused. My business partner and I intend to develop cattle ranching on the property, Theresa explained, glancing at Wyatt. The spring makes that possible, even in drought years. Whitfield considered this, clearly reassessing the young woman before him. After a moment, he nodded slowly. 15,000, debt forgiveness, and limited surface access points to be mutually agreed upon. Final terms to be formalized by company attorneys within the week. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement in principle, Miss Landon? Theresa hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. We do, Mr. Whitfield, provided all parties understand that any further attempts at intimidation will result in immediate termination of negotiations and public disclosure of recent events. Understood completely. Whitfield stood, retrieving his hat. I believe we'll have a productive relationship moving forward, Miss Landon. You're a formidable negotiator. After Whitfield departed with the sheriff and prisoners, Thomas lingered to check on Theresa and the others. He found her sitting on the porch, gazing out at her property with a stunned expression. $15,000, she murmured as he sat beside her. I can hardly comprehend it. Thomas smiled. You deserve every cent, Theresa. And more importantly, you've kept your home. Not just kept it, transformed it. She turned to him, eyes bright with possibilities. With that money, we can build a proper ranch. Cattle, better structures, maybe even hire a few hands. We? Thomas inquired gently. Theresa's cheeks colored slightly. Wyatt and I, we're partners. Just partners? His tone was kind, without judgment. Before she could respond, Wyatt approached from the barn where he'd been conferring with Donovan and Ferris about next steps. The Carson men will stay until the agreements are signed, he reported. After that, it's up to us to build what comes next. The way he looked at Theresa with admiration, respect, and something deeper answered Thomas's question more eloquently than words could have. The doctor stood, recognizing it was time to leave them to their shared future. I should return to town, he said. Mrs. Henderson is helping me secure a new location for my practice. Perhaps on your next visit, you'll see it taking shape. After Thomas departed, Theresa and Wyatt stood together on the porch, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across land that was now unquestionably hers, secured not just legally, but through courage and determination. What happens now? She asked softly. Wyatt turned to face her fully. That depends on what you want, Theresa. The ranch, she began, then hesitated, suddenly uncertain. But that's assuming you plan to stay. Is that what you want? His gray eyes searched hers. For me to stay? The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken hopes and fears. Theresa had spent so many years being strong, standing alone against whatever challenges life presented. The idea of letting someone stand beside her, of trusting another person with her heart as well as her dreams, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Yes, she admitted finally. I want you to stay, not just as a business partner. Relief and joy transformed Wyatt's expression. I was hoping you'd say that. He took her hands in his. Because I don't want to leave. Not now. Not ever. When did you know? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That first day when I saw you at your father's grave. You looked so alone, yet so determined to face whatever came next. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. I recognized something in you that called to me a strength that matched my own, but also a loneliness I understood too well. I thought no one saw me, Theresa confessed. All those years, keeping up appearances, hiding my fears and doubts, I became so used to being invisible. I saw every tear, Wyatt said softly, every brave smile, every moment you chose courage over surrender. How could I not fall in love with someone so extraordinary? The word love hung in the air between them, unexpected, yet somehow inevitable. Theresa felt tears welling in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from a joy so profound it almost hurt. I never thought I'd hear those words, she whispered, or feel this way. "And how do you feel?" Wyatt asked, his voice gentle but intent. Instead of answering with words, Theresa rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Wyatt's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. All the tension, fear, and uncertainty of recent days dissolved in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Theresa rested her forehead against his chest. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both new and familiar. "I think I have since you offered to fix my roof without asking for anything in return." Wyatt laughed softly. "I got far more than I bargained for." "So did I." She looked up at him, her brown eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. Partner. 1 year later. The Ryder Ranch sprawled across the once barren landscape surrounding Theresa's cabin, though cabin was no longer an accurate description of the expanded and improved home that now stood at the property's center. With the proceeds from the mining agreement, they had built a proper ranch house, a new barn, corrals, and bunkhouses for the hands they had hired to manage their growing herd of cattle. The spring, now properly developed and protected, provided water for both the ranch operations and the mining activities that continued beneath the property. True to the agreement, the Silverado and Carson joint venture had maintained minimal surface presence, with most work occurring underground through carefully designated access points that didn't interfere with ranching. Holcomb and his men had been captured and tried, receiving lengthy sentences in the territorial prison. The Silverado Mining Company, eager to distance itself from the scandal, had become a model corporate citizen in the region, even funding the construction of a new, larger clinic for Thomas Evans. Copper Ridge itself had benefited from the prosperity generated by the mining operations and the ranch. New businesses had opened, families had moved to the area, and the once struggling settlement was becoming a proper town. On this particular evening, the ranch was hosting a celebration. Lanterns hung from trees and fence posts, illuminating tables laden with food and drink. Music from a small band of local musicians filled the air as people from town and neighboring ranches gathered to celebrate Wyatt and Theresa's first wedding anniversary. Theresa stood on the porch of their home, watching the festivities with contentment. Her hand rested lightly on her slightly rounded belly, where their first child had recently made its presence known. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Ryder," Wyatt said, approaching with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Just thinking about how much has changed in a year," she replied, accepting the drink. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is our life." Wyatt's gaze swept over the ranch, the gathered community, and finally returned to his wife's face. "You made it happen, Theresa. Your courage, your determination." "We made it happen," she corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You weren't meant to." He placed his free hand over hers on her abdomen, just as our child won't face the world alone. Thomas Evans approached, interrupting the moment with a warm smile. "The guests are asking for a toast from the hosts," he said, "and Mrs. Henderson wants everyone to know her special peach pie won't last much longer." Laughing, they joined their guests. Standing before the assembled crowd, Wyatt raised his glass. "A year ago, many of you witnessed the beginning of our journey together," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Some of you helped us face challenges that seemed insurmountable. Others have joined our extended family as this ranch has grown." He looked at Theresa with unmistakable love. But the true miracle began when a cowboy passing through noticed a woman who thought no one saw her. Theresa squeezed his hand, her heart full as she addressed their friends. "To all of you who believed in us, who helped us build this home and this community, thank you. And to my husband, who saw me when I felt invisible and loved me when I thought I was unlovable every day with you, is a gift I never expected." As cheers erupted and glasses clinked, Wyatt drew Theresa into a gentle embrace. Above them, stars emerged in the twilight sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their struggles, and now their triumph. The same stars that would watch over their growing family and the legacy they were building together. Every tear was worth it, Theresa whispered against his chest. "Every moment of doubt, every struggle, because they led me to you." "And every mile I wandered brought me home," Wyatt replied, sealing the sentiment with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love yet to come. In the dancing light of the lanterns, surrounded by the community they had helped strengthen, Wyatt and Theresa Ryder stood as living proof that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is allow themselves to be truly seen, and that when two such souls find each other, there is no challenge they cannot overcome together.